Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. We're running along here through the summer. You did a late in the day workout on the weekend, which is topical for today's episode.
Yes. I mean, this episode, we're talking all about cognitive overload and sort of all of the training around that, which is, very relevant. Saturday, I was helping at a trails clinic. So talking about some hill running stuff, doing a bit of Q&A, also covering the Tour de France stage, and then trying to squeak in my workout. So my long run happened much later in the day than planned.
Also, you had a morose husband and a needy dog that were needing your attention while you were doing these 7 jobs and trying to get your workout in.
Well, you said it, I didn't.
So this is, I think, something that resonates with a lot of the busy adults, masters athletes that listen to this podcast. And so we're very excited to have Dr. Scott Frey on the podcast talking about all things, related to the neuro, the psycho, and his research into these areas.
Yes. So, we're talking about all of this in the context of performing as an athlete, but I think all of this is also, performing as your best kind of human self. And I think what I like about him is that it's all interrelated. And I think he takes a really, good look at how everything is connected. So you have a really hard day at work. Guess what? Your workout is going to feel harder. And what's great about him is he's a cognitive neuroscientist. So we've talked to a ton of sports psychologists, and we absolutely love having sports psychs on the podcast. Do not get me wrong here. But, I think sometimes people don't necessarily believe the psychology side of things. It's a bit of like, oh, it's all in your head. They
Right.
kind of wave it away or think that you can just kind of tough it out. You can push
It's not
through.
like a hard science.
Yeah. It's, if you just keep pushing, you're going to get through. And I think it was cool having Scott on to talk about the fact that, no, this is actually your brain doing a thing. This is not necessarily something that you can opt out of or tough your way through. There are mental strategies. There's ways you can work on this stuff, but it is very much a real physical reaction.
Right. And so we talk about sometimes it is worthwhile, sort of as Molly did on the weekend at the end of the day, later than she usually would have trained, going and doing that run. Even though it felt harder, because that's, especially as someone who runs 100-mile races that take a day, the better part of a day to do, it can be beneficial. So you can actually reframe that sometimes. But then we also talk about the flip side when we are trying to get that performance, that peak, that taper, that part of that for busy people is trying to get them away from some of that cognitive load as much as we can without, upsetting the rest of our life for the rest of our life. Is sort of like this idea of, trying to peak sometimes and separating that. And then also sometimes we can actually reframe and actually benefit from some of these cognitive loads.
Absolutely, yeah. And before we get into this episode with Scott, quick shout out to our sponsors over at Payable. So I'm actually heading down to upstate New York to help out at a women's mountain bike clinic this weekend, Rooted Mountain Bike. I'm super excited about it. I'll have all of my Strong Girl Publishing books, a lot of Shred Girls books, Running as Fast as We Can, Misha Chappelle's Sprinting Through Setbacks. Side note, actually, Power Up by one of our favorite registered dietitians, Stevie Smith, is officially available for pre-order. So that's another exciting Strong Girl thing. But anyway, while I'm down at Rooted, I'm actually using Payable as the way that I take payments at any of these events.
Mm-hmm. And these are good friends of ours and big supporters of everything that Molly does and that we do as well. So we love having this sort of like, as you embedded an ad inside of an ad, these are our friends who are supporting the podcast and lots of the stuff in the sporting community. And yeah, you can use it for anything you use a Google form. So Molly's accepting payments for her books. You might accept payment for the kids' girl guides, or your website needs someone to support it. And so you can use a Google form and accept payments very easily on your terms, no subscriptions, low fees. So it's a great product that we use ourselves and really believe in. And again, someone who supports sport and things that hopefully everyone listening enjoys.
So you can find links to all of that and our favorite templates over at payableapps.com/athlete. Again, payableapps.com/athlete. And all right, without further ado, let's get into this conversation with Dr. Scott Frey. Enjoy. All right, consummate athlete here with Dr. Scott Frey. Scott, thank you so much for waking up early to hop on the podcast with us.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, I thought maybe to get started, you mentioned you were sort of talking to athletes over in Europe, and so maybe, rather than going through your whole bio, which
Yeah.
we'll have already given here, maybe just tell us, what's the day in the life like? What are you talking to these athletes about early in your morning?
Yeah, what a great question. So yes, you're my second meeting of the day. I was just on the Zooming with an athlete that I work with who's an Olympic triathlete and is going through what many of us can relate to, which is woke up with pain in the foot and having to get some imaging done. And so we spent time talking about what happens when there's an unexpected setback, which is something I think that you and I and probably everyone who's listening to this podcast can relate to, right? One of the more challenging things mentally for an athlete is when they can't do their thing in the way that they want to. And so we were really talking about, okay, this is part of the deal. Even it doesn't matter if you're an amateur or someone who's gearing up for heading back to another Olympic Games. This is a reality of it, and how do we cope with that, and how do we develop some effective strategies to work with that as opposed to be worked over by that.
And really step back. And it's interesting. You would think they would be going to a physiotherapist. And so folks listening may think like, oh, you're like a physio, you're like treating them through the Zoom, but you're actually talking about this is really the central, I think, to what we're discussing today is the mental aspect, the neuro, uh, science aspect, the cognitive aspect of injury of performance is really what you're dealing with this.
Yeah, in this case, and one of the wonderful things about the way my sort of second career has evolved is that I find myself working on a lot of different things, and every day is a little bit different. And I'll give you kind of just a quick little picture of why the brain matters to a situation like this. And it comes down to how the brain processes pain. So there are really two systems in the brain that are involved in our experience of pain. And one is the sensory part, right? We're getting input from these specialized sensory cells distributed throughout our body called nociceptors. And there's not a lot we can do about that. There is this sensory signal coming in, just like you're getting an auditory signal from my voice while you're listening to me. But then on top of that, there's another system that is related, but kind of semi-independent, that is emotional and also cognitive or thinking related. And it has to do with how we interpret what that pain means. So, what we know about pain, and we used to do a lot of pain research in my lab, is that when people are anxious, that anxiety and that cognitive and emotional network of areas in the brain amplifies those incoming sensory signals and makes the pain worse. So that you can think of as having some significance evolutionarily, right? If you're having pain and you're in a stressful situation, it might be really important for you, even more important than if you weren't in a stressful situation, to attend to that pain and act to get yourself out of that situation or stop whatever's causing you pain. So one of the things we can do with that is start to talk about, like, how do we manage that anxiety around that pain, and how do we kind of start to just reframe that pain a little bit, and in doing so decrease the sort of amplification of it.
Interesting, interesting. And listeners will have we've had Greg Lehman, who's a physio who does a lot with pain science, and he spoke towards some of those concepts around sort of the biopsychosocial
Wonderful.
model of pain. So hopefully listeners will be a little familiar with that. But I know we're going to add more layers onto it today. So maybe before we go too far down like that pain, I love that example because that's a thing where we're sort of using sports psychology, mental training to sort of work through that. I think that's probably top of mind for a lot of people where they're sort of they want to go to the next level, cat up, this sort of thing. So I think maybe just even hearing your brief story in athletics might also be another way we can edge into like what is it that you're doing with this brain training, with this sports psychology.
Yeah, so I'll give you a very short version of a long story,
Sure,
which
sure.
I turned 60 this past February, and so this has been going on a long time. My love and sort of flirtation with endurance athletes goes back to when I was a teenager, so let's say like 45 years. And I discovered that running, this little running habit that I kind of cultivated, played a really important role when I was outside my running shoes. And it was causing my life to move in better directions. It was helping me to be more dedicated to the academic stuff I decided to pursue. It was helping me cope with some pretty serious stress that was going on in my life. I dropped out of high school to help support my mom and I. My mom was disabled with multiple sclerosis. We didn't have a lot of money. And at 16, I left high school to go to work and help to support us. And at the same time, I developed this running habit, and I wasn't really sure why I felt better when I ran, but I knew that I felt better. And I knew that it was really helping me to cope with a lot of those difficult situations. And later on, it helped me to really understand what it meant to dedicate yourself to something and get up and do the thing day in and day out, even when you might not want to. And that transferred very well to what ended up being my academic career and devoting myself to that. Very serious about running throughout the 80s when it was the excessive 80s and everyone was running, super high mileage. I was one of those guys and loved it. Got into triathlon in the early 90s. And I guess that's like in pen and paper, that's where I had my best results in result sheets. And then fell in love with cross country skiing somewhere along the way. And so that became part of a thing. And now I no longer can run. So I'm exclusively racing bikes in the summer and cross country skis in the winter. So that's kind of the snapshot of how this has evolved. But even there were long periods in there when I couldn't compete, but I always kept, I would say, training. Um, because I'm in love, I fell in love with the process. And so one of the things, regardless of what level the athlete is that I'm working with, that's a big emphasis. Like, what is your sense of purpose? Why are you doing this? And not losing sight of that, even if you are that elite athlete who's earning their living, doing their sport, really getting back to, why did you start doing this in the first place? And what is it that you love about it and what motivates you? So that's that's that.
Real consummate athlete. Yeah, you're doing all
Yeah.
sorts of different sports. I love it. And still doing that as well. So I guess from there, I mean, lots going on in life there across the whole span. So I think that resonates with a lot of the listeners we have and a lot of the athletes we work with, where there's a lot going on. There's life, there's family, there's work, and then there's this endurance training that we, and racing that we, for some reason, try and add on to the top of this. And as you say, I think a lot of us see benefits. So I guess what seemed like in your work with athletes, it seemed like this idea of like fatigue or resilience, focus. There seem to be a lot of elements around that. So you want to talk a little bit how you help these high performers deal with that like fatigue piece, and just like how much we have going on, and then we're trying to go out and just do threshold intervals on our bikes or on our feet.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I'm not a sports psychologist, although my PhD is in experimental psychology. I spent my career studying how the brain creates all of our behaviors, emotion and thought and perception and all the things that are vital for our survival and everyday life, but are also part of what it takes to be a high performer. And that kind of perspective really informs the work that I do with athletes. And so one of the ways in which that comes to fruition is by thinking about um, what are the limiters on performance? And one of the ways I like to describe this is by introducing just two basic concepts. One is like physical capacity. And so in your coaching work with athletes, you're prescribing over distance sessions and interval sessions and tempo sessions and all of these kind of workouts designed to stress the body in certain ways to raise that physical capacity. In addition to that, there's something I like to talk about as functional capacity. And that is the what kind of puts the limit or the ceiling on how much of that physical capacity you can access at any one time. And what's really interesting is that there's a lot of evidence that the brain is what sets the ceiling on that functional capacity, right? So the job of the brain, in a very general sense, is to protect us and keep us alive. And it's going to do everything it can to prevent you from going so deep in that physical capacity that you fully exhaust yourself and meet an untimely end. It can feel like you're going to meet an untimely end in
Like
the
that's
middle
how
of a
my
hard
intervals
race.
felt yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. But you're nowhere near that. And so one of the things we work on is like, what are the things that influences the brain to either allow you to go a little deeper into that physical capacity or to grab the brakes? And one of the things that I think athletes at all levels underappreciate, and I do mean at all levels, I mean, right, like from the world tour cyclists all the way down to the new beginners, is that one of the factors influencing the brain's decision about how deep it will allow you to go is fatigue. And the sort of fatigue that I'm talking about here is probably different than most of your listeners think about fatigue. It's very easy for us to think about like fatigue in your muscles. You go out to start your run and your muscles feel sore, they feel heavy, and they just don't want to play. The sort of fatigue I'm talking about is I call central fatigue. It's fatigue in the central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord. And for over 100 years, we've known that when your brain is fatigued, we could induce fatigue in your brain in the lab. We could have you do exhausting mental tasks. It actually reduces your capacity to do physical work. There's a very clever scientist, Angelo Mosso, Italian physiologist, did these elegant studies in the late 1800s, the late 19th century, showing that when his colleagues at the university were mentally fatigued during exam time, when they were grading all these exams and examining their students, they could do less work in this little contraption he built where they just had to lift a weight with their finger until they got to complete exhaustion. Like total nerd science here, right? But I love this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You can go back and look at these papers. And there was nothing in their work with the students that was about their muscles being fatigued, and yet their ability to do work with their muscles would go down. And that kind of got lost and then rediscovered as things in science often do. And there have been a lot of studies in the last 20 years or so showing that indeed, in the sports we love, in cycling and running and rowing and cross country skiing, all these endurance sports, we can bring people in the lab and we can induce mental fatigue, have them do these fatiguing cognitive tasks, and their ability to perform, say, on a cycling ergometer goes down. So then the question becomes, what do we do about that, right?
Yeah.
And we can go there if you'd like.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you have something?
Well, I was gonna say, yeah, it's interesting because all I can think now is like, oh no, what do I do with that information, right? Like yesterday I had a couple articles due. I had my, hill repeat workout. By the time we got to the afternoon,
Air
like
conditioners leaking.
air conditioners leaking.
Oh
I
man.
think that wrecked both of us. Like when I tell you, I think we both maybe cried when the air conditioners started leaking. I was just like, that was the
It's been an
limit.
ongoing saga. It took more than one air conditioner breaking to
Oh
anyhow.
man.
Have us
So
in tears.
so we
But
both and I think we were both doing hill intervals yesterday and it was like yeah, it was like hard because we had done all this other stuff before the interval. So do we just get rid of the rest of our life or do we is it an order effect or how do we get better at this or do we want to get better? Maybe this is good training. I don't know.
not
Yeah,
the air.
well, the answer is some or a little bit of all of those things. For
Okay.
most of us, we can't just abandon
Right.
those, the rest of our lives. Um, And I think as amateur athletes, we often look at the professional athletes, we think, oh, wouldn't that be great? And we would just be putting our feet up and somebody else would take care of everything. I think we'll get our massage and someone
Right.
cooks our dinner. And well, that may be true for some. There's a lot of load that those folks experience too, and it's just different load. And so getting back to us, right? So we're juggling careers and we're juggling families and whatever else is going on, air conditioners that are breaking and roofs that are leaking, who knows, right? It all goes on in the everyday life. Um, One of the things we can do is just become aware that that kind of life stress, right, and fatigue in our central nervous system does affect performance. And it does it by the brain reducing the ceiling on that functional capacity. It pulls it down a little bit. You didn't lose fitness, right? Nothing happened to your muscles, your energy systems, cardiovascular system. It's just the brain is saying, we're going to lower the bar a little bit. You're not going to be able to go as deep. And well, on the everyday, we kind of have to roll with that, most of us. When we're heading into a big race, I think that one of the things we can start to do is think about how we can lighten that cognitive load in advance. Start planning things in advance. What I see a lot with athletes is that they have a taper week or two for the big event that they've been training for months. And they're great about backing down on the training, but they often backfill it with all the kind of things that they've been pushing off their plate so they could get the weekend long run or ride in, right?
Hmm.
That's
Like
not the
like
time to
buying a
do it.
new house and putting your condo up for sale, for example. Just
Oh,
just
yeah.
spitballing ideas here, not
Yeah.
planning book
Not
releases, etc. I've totally never have done this. Yeah.
nothing personal here, just a fictitious. I know a friend
Yeah,
who
I'm leaving. I gotta go.
yeah. So yeah, I think we've all been there. But often if you really look at it and you become aware that this is an issue and that it might be actually costing you performance in your big day, you would never go to your big day without tapering physically, probably, right? So why would you go there without tapering your mental load if it's really going to cost you in terms of physical performance? How can you look ahead and plan? How can you come up with a strategy where you start to find the things that you can let go of? And I get it. Look, you probably can't let go of work. If you have kids, you probably can't just, tell them to leave you alone for a week. You're tapering, but there probably are things that you can cut out. There's a couple of nice studies came out in the last couple of years on the cognitive load generated from social media and from video games and showing that actually does affect physical performance. Surprise, surprise. Well, those are probably two things that we could put in park for a few days and the world would be okay and they'd be waiting for us when we got out. So I think there are some low-hanging fruit here for athletes, no matter what their life situation is, to really look at what can go. And I get it, some things can't, but there probably are a few things that you can let go of.
I love it. Yeah, I talk about the working person's peak, and it's sort of this like you try and take people away from their families and their work, in that week or days or day, whatever they can afford. But it's funny. I often say like I don't even really think peaking and tapering for masters athletes is it's whatever, right? Like I think the research on that is like physiologically, like the training and whatever is what it is. But I think that bandwidth, if we can just say like you just can't look at your house, you can't vacuum it, you're not there, like you've sort outsourced that, and that puts load on a family. But I do think when I've seen that done well, it's sort of like you just put in these blocks that like you aren't at your house, you can't fix it, right? Like we've blocked it off.
Yeah. No, and if people need to, I mean, there are some of us who we can hear that a million times. It'll be very hard for us to make the change,
Right,
but I'm
right.
here to tell you that there's solid neuroscience and data, and people can go to my website and take a look if that would be helpful in them to really convince themselves that we're not just this is not far out woo woo kind of stuff. It's really legit. Your brain is the central command and control center for everything that's going on with your body. It's not some separate entity that, just kind of sits atop your shoulders and goes along for the ride. And that all we have to worry about in preparing an athlete is their physicality, their body. And that's unfortunately kind of a message that's been implicit in, I think, the way a lot of sports science has proceeded. The focus has been very intensely from the neck down. And neuroscience, my field, has kind of been not having a seat at the table in sports science. And that's part of what motivated me to step away from my career as a professor and researcher, and really try to find ways to connect some of the great science that I was seeing that was getting buried in academic journals and never making its way out into the world with these applications.
Hmm.
It's interesting because it occurs to me that a lot of people still, and I mean, we'll argue against it for days, like kind of dismiss like sport psychology as kind of like the soft skill. But it
Yeah,
sort of feels like when you put the like neuroscience lens on like how we're looking at the brain, it's actually like kind of showcasing, I guess, that no, this is actually like there is a physical, a physiological like skill to all of this.
yeah, absolutely. And, the coolest thing about the brain that we've really come to understand more deeply in the last, I'd say, 60 years is we've always known that the brain produces our behavior, right? We've known that for many hundreds of years, but we've really come to appreciate that our behavior in turn sculpts the brain. It reshapes the brain. And the sort of jargon for that is neuroplasticity. Our brains change adaptively to support our behavior. So if we change our behavior and we do that in a consistent way, we're literally restructuring the circuitry of our brain to better support that behavior into the future. It's similar with training, physical training, right? You go to the gym and you're working on your strength. And what you're doing is you're remodeling neuromuscular systems that then allow you to do that behavior even better, right? It's an analogous thing that's happening with the brain, and it's something that we really want to be leveraging to advantage in our performance as athletes, but of course in daily life as well. So as we're
Mhm.
sitting here, we're having this conversation. Hopefully, there'll be some new information for your listeners. They'll be learning things. They'll be forming memories. Well, that's neuroplasticity, right? Those memories are physically instantiated in circuitry of the brain.
Mhm.
And that's one of the kind of, as you said, a lens that neuroscience brings to this that I think is very important and has been missing, kind of missing from a lot of the sports psych stuff. But it provides a common language with the rest of sports science, which is biologically based.
I love it. And then my other like kind of definition-y question here is, one of the
Yes.
the sexy hot topics lately has been this idea of like fatigue resistance, right? Like when we're
Mm.
especially in ultra distance stuff, like this whole concept of like, oh, that athlete is like more fatigue resistant. Any thoughts on like how much of that is below the neck versus above the neck, if you if you
Yeah.
will?
No, it's the flip side of the coin. So, yes, I hear a lot about durability these days, and that's sort of I'm hearing less about zone two. It just keeps going, right? We hear these things coming about like they're completely fresh concepts, and I'm old, and I started out running and was inspired by Arthur Lydiard's book. You can go back there and see that a lot of the things we think are
Yeah.
such new, amazing concepts really have been talked about for many decades. But look, the answer to your question is an interesting one. Of course, there's both the neuromuscular, metabolic, and cardiovascular aspects to that resilience, but there's also a central nervous system contribution as well. And so, one of the things that I've been doing a lot with my athletes is trying to train fatigue resistance into the central nervous system. And I'll tell you, I've been watching the research in this area for about 15 years, and it's just has various terminology associated with it. One of the common ones is brain endurance training. Like, can we build more fatigue resistance so that this central fatigue is more manageable, right? The first obvious thing is like, let's limit it. But then in addition, how can we make the systems more resilient so that deeper into your competition, you're functioning at a higher level? And I was very skeptical about this research, right? I looked at it and thought, yeah, that can't be real. But then the papers kept coming out and consistently pointing in a similar direction. And so I've started to work with some of my athletes where we're pairing kind of brain training, cognitive tasks that I build for them and they do on their phone or an iPad or something like that with physical training. So the idea is basically that when you come back physically fatigued from a hard workout, let's say your hill interval session, right? You hop on your phone and you do 20 minutes of these very demanding cognitive tasks, right? How can we start those and progress those in difficulty? So the same principles that you might apply to training an athlete, consistency, progressing in sort of the level of the stimulation you're giving them, recovery, periodization. We employ all of that, but we start to several times a week pair up this kind of brain training with physical training. And what the research says is that when you do that, going back to that concept of functional capacity, you start to see that athletes have a slight reduction in perceived exertion, that the brain is letting the brakes off a little bit. One of the ways the brain puts the brakes on us is it escalates our perceived exertion, right? It makes you feel really bad and you start having negative thoughts in your head and I can't do this much longer and I can't hang on. It starts to ease the brakes off just a little bit. And we're not talking performance gains of like double-digit percentages, right? That would be ridiculous. And if people hear people talking about that, generally they should run in the other direction, I think.
Right,
But
right.
we're talking about changes in performance that can be significant in show up on in terms of performance in races. And even more importantly, I guess to me, is that the athletes that I work with who devoted themselves to this are reporting to me feeling mentally fresher, being able to make more clear-headed decisions later in their events when it matters. So take a cyclist, for example, right? They're 4 hours into a difficult race, and that's when the strategic moves start to happen. If they could be just a little bit fresher in terms of their ability to focus attention, to inhibit responses until the right move goes up the road and make those decisions quicker and react quicker, that could make a big difference between being in the group or shelled out the back. And I think we can think of analogies to this across all of the endurance sports.
Mm-hmm. And that makes it like, I guess, two aspects is you just described a very specific situation. So like late in a race, any race really, there's going to be like a critical moment where you go or you don't go. And that's like a
Yeah.
decision, right? And that's what we would say is you decided to get in front of the person or not, and to do the work or not. You tried to sit in, but then you were in the wrong position at the wrong time, I guess. So I guess my question is, do you see, and I know I've seen some of this research too, but do you think the specificity matters in that I could go do a 4 hour ride and then jump into a group ride or something, and that would be like specific, hard to structure and hard to access, but specific versus 4 hour ride and then do the iPad exercises or we'll say non-specific exercises for brain
Yeah.
training. Do you think the specificity matters?
I do. And I think that all the time when we're training as athletes, we might be thinking about what we're doing in terms of the neck down stuff, right? Metabolics, energy systems, neuromuscular systems, so forth. But at the same time, we're always training our brains. It's always happening. We just don't often frame it that way. Every time you go out and do those hill workouts and get through those difficult patches, you're building a little bit more resilience, a little bit more ability to move through that discomfort. You're getting more familiar with it. You're reinforcing those circuits in the brain as well as in the body. So I do think that specificity is vitally important. And I would be the last one to ever tell people that, yeah, no, we can just work on your brain and you don't need to train as much and all that stuff, right?
Right. Like
But I do think
Do Sudokus, and you're going to be like the best athlete in the world.
you're going to be killing it.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think that there's something to this kind of intensified, distilled down, very focused cognitive training layered on top of physical fatigue that gives you kind of a very uh, strong dose of this kind of stimulus
Right.
that's very
Right.
hard to accumulate in uh, in the actual
Because it's
activity.
not accessible a lot of times, right? Like where, as much as I have this idealized, like, I go my 4 hour ride and then I jump in a group ride. It's like, well, the group ride's not going. How are you jumping in this? These people also aren't very good. Like, it's not like the people you race. So,
Like you don't have time to like do that.
right. Well, there's also that. Um,
And how many times during that group ride do you actually get
One,
to
if you're lucky.
exercise those decisions, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And with our stuff, you might you might be making 60 of those decisions a minute. It's fast, right? It's
Hmm.
intense. It's really concentrated. So I think that both are important.
Hmm. Hmm.
It also occurs to me you can kind of use this almost as a bit of a placebo for like the busy working people. So, you come home for coming back to the workout yesterday, you come home yesterday, we had to get right on a call from like workout into call. And normally I'm like, oh God, I'm so tired. This kind of stinks. Like this is
Yeah.
not my ideal situation. But if I can kind of reframe that as like, no, this is fatigue training. This is mental training. That actually makes work in the afternoon seem like a lot more fun.
Well, I think, how we look at things is everything. So, it's funny to think about my PhD back in 1993. So people are like that. Yeah, I'm getting to be a little ancient here. Um, was in perception, was in how does the brain create our perceptions of the world, right? And if you think about it, you've got this brain, it's has no direct contact with the world. It's locked away in the chamber of your skull. It's completely dark in there. The only way that it has access to what's happening around you is through your sensory systems, your vision, your hearing, your touch, and so forth. And it's taking all of those inputs and creating a kind of experience. That's what we experience as reality. But it's demonstrably true that our perceptions are not 100% accurate pictures of the physics of the reality around us. It's constructed based on our past experiences, what we think is going to happen in the future, and what we think is the nature of the context in which we're having those experiences. And so if you reframe something like you're talking about, what you're doing is you're kind of altering that construct that your brain is building about the perception. So now it's not a negative thing, it's a potentially helpful thing. And, it's not rocket science, but it actually is grounded in physiology and can have really powerful effects. So I think you should do that.
Love it. Love it.
Now, I know I went through, we'll link to a few articles because you had some great ones on the website. So we'll certainly link to some of those. And one that caught my eye was around sort of the inner critic, you call it, and maybe we call that self-talk or something like that. And so that's one of the areas I try and focus on in coaching as much as I can as a lowly coach and with minimal training in that direction. So maybe just talk to us a bit about how we can silence this inner critic, that we all have, pros and amateurs alike. But some people seem to be better at damping that down, and other people are really good at picking on themselves in their head or out loud sometimes. So tell us about this inner critic and how we can improve there.
Yeah. So one of the downsides of having these great big brains that we humans carry around with us with all this like gray matter, right? Is that we have this constant narrative running in our head. And often we kind of think of it as us, right? The voice in your head that's constantly interpreting, this is what's going on, this is what's going on, this is what I'm feeling, this is what they really meant, this is that, I'm going to do that later, I just did this, I wonder what they thought about this. It just never shuts up, right? It kind of goes and goes and goes. That Interestingly enough, so a lot of my work in science was in functional brain imaging. So early on, get the PhD, and soon after that, went and respecialized in this brand new technology, which allowed us to look for the first time in history at what actually is going on in people's heads when they're having a thought, when they're retrieving a memory, when they're experiencing an emotion, or planning an action, or imagining, a scenario. And one of the studies that we did quite some time ago in the lab was looking at what areas of the brain are active during that internal dialogue. We put people in situations where we had them specifically cued to like do self-talk. Okay. And what's super interesting about that to me, and what has the practical implications for answering your question, is that the areas that are involved in that chatter and that self-talk overlap and recruit the same areas that are involved in speaking out loud. So, people can think back if they did Psych 101 way back when, there are areas in the left side of the brain and the frontal parts of the brain that are very important for speech and language production. So if someone has a stroke, they have a left-sided stroke, they typically manifest some kind of linguistic problems, language problems, trouble talking, aphasia. Well, it turns out there's an interesting way to shut down that internal dialogue that is dead simple, and that is start talking out loud. You can't do both things at once. So when you're talking to your athletes and you're giving them recommendations for when, we all go there. You get deep into those intervals, you get deep into that race, things are hurting. That negative self-talk starts kicking in. You can think of that related to what we said. The brain is starting to try to put the brakes on you. It doesn't know how long you're going to be putting yourself through this. It's trying to protect you, right? It doesn't realize that the race is only going to take you another half an hour to finish. It thinks you're going to go until you blow. So it starts putting on the brakes, and that negative self-talk is part of that. But if you start talking out loud, it will stop. It will stop it dead in its tracks, because those brain networks that are needed to talk out loud are the same ones that are needed to do the internal chatter.
Also, it
So that's
totally
my
throws off your
recommendation.
competitors in the race. Like they all just think you're nuts and they're like, "Ooh,
Well,
let this guy go."
that's right. And if you want to get a lot of room in your seat on the bus, just start talking out loud. It's very effective. You'll have your own row before you know it. But yes, and look, you don't have to scream and yell at the top of your lungs to make this work. You could just
Whisper,
simply
yeah.
kind of talk under your breath, but you can't do both things at once.
Now, how damaging if I say you are a piece of crap, like you suck,
Like
like
out loud.
because
Yeah.
I
This
hear
is the out
people,
loud.
some of the masters men I work with who are the most
Okay, this
vigorous
is
with this,
actually true. Yeah, they're weirdly like vocal
but they're
about.
out loud and they're not talking to me, they're talking to like themselves, and you're like, whoa. Right.
Yeah.
And so is that even more damaging if they say the negative thing out loud?
Is
Is
it
that what
possible that they were thinking something really nice in their head and then they're like, no, no, no.
they're stopping it in its tracks?
Yeah, I was thinking about it the other way, like, wow, if that's what they're saying out loud, what was
Right.
going
Okay.
on in there?
Likely that's the situation.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I've always laughed and imagined like if there was a little screen on our forehead that was like the ticker tape of what's going on in there.
Right. Ooh.
Yeah, yeah, you'd be shocked. But
We'd be extinct as a species, I think.
yeah, probably right. Um, I think that there's a lot of good data out there, and this does come from this traditional sports psych world about the power of positive self-talk. So my recommendation, and I say this based on no evidence whatsoever, just personal experience, not science, harness that positive self-talk in that talk out loud thing. Shut down those negative thought loops by not only vocalizing out loud, but also vocalizing things that are motivating, positive, encouraging. I think it's a much better idea than flogging yourself even further.
Trying to think how to do that like halfway through. Like, you're a piece of really solid athletic achievement. That's what you are. Like,
You're a real specimen. Yeah.
Well, and I think the important thing, and maybe you can guide us in, pretend you're talking to me and, I'm an athlete. Like you're not going to say in the race, remember to do this. You're going to say in those hard workouts this week, what are we going to say, plan it out and do it, right?
Yep.
Like, is that how that would be implemented, or is it a race day only sort of like, is this like my turbo caffeine gel that I'm just going to take on race day, which is also not a good
yeah, please
practice.
don't do that.
Yeah. I know. The expense of some of those gels does make it tough to do
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going to train my gut on,
Right.
$7 gels or whatever,
That's
right?
real. That's
Uh,
real. Yeah.
that's real. Exactly. No, I think that what we're talking about here are developing habits, and habits, just like any other habit, you need to cultivate these and practice these in your training. So we want to have you working on these. I'm really big with my athletes on coming up with cue words and that will help them cue into something like what we're talking about here, right? And I like them to come up with the word or phrase themselves so that it really has meaning to them. And I'll even go so far as to push them to write it on their stem of their bike. I mean, I know I have pro athletes who actually write stuff on the stem of their bike. So if they're willing to do it, we
Hmm.
amateurs should be comfortable doing these kinds of things, because when you get into the depths of a race and your attentional focus is starting to narrow and shut down and you're on the edge, it's very hard to remember these things that are so easy to remember and talk about as we're sitting here, over morning coffee or whatever. So yeah, you need some kind of reminders, and you need to build these habits in your training so that they become more automated. They become something that doesn't require a lot of cognitive load and effort to dig out, right? We're trying not to build more cognitive fatigue. We're trying not to chew up more resources.
I thought to, finish towards, we have, 15 minutes or so we'll work through here, but I thought some sort of case studies, they're anonymous, but sort of some things. And if some of them are misses, we can just like leave those. But are you game to sort of try a couple like sort of like situations and how you might start edging into helping an athlete experiencing certain, uh, things, concerns?
Sounds fun. Let's
Okay.
do it.
So this is a fairly elite level rider, national level, and sort of during the warm up, maybe early in the race, but often more, either before the race or during the warm up, they're amped, they're feeling good, and then there's sort of like this shutdown, like change in mood, change in energy, that they're feeling, right? And then often that's, in the discipline they're in, like the start's pretty important. So anything that comes to mind there, have you seen that before?
I've seen everything before and probably experienced it myself as well. Just by dearth of being around for a while. So, I guess the first question I would ask, and you might think, well, that's not a brain question, but it is a brain question, is there a fueling issue with this athlete? And you probably already went there yourself, but I'll tell you why I asked it. The brain is about 2% of your body weight, but it consumes about 20% of your daily caloric expenditure. And that's just hanging out at rest, right? So, um, I would one of the first things that starts to go sideways when the brain is trying to adjust that ceiling of how deep it's going to let you go is dependent on how much fuel the brain thinks you have on board. So even before performance starts to deteriorate, the brain will start to lower the bar on that functional capacity because it knows that there's not that much left in the tank. So my first question would be for this athlete is, are they really on top of their fueling, and are they really fueled up appropriately?
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, that's a good one. Yeah, and they could certainly try, increasing that. So that's a good one.
And the first thing that goes when we start to get low on fuel is our mood, right?
Right. Right.
Usually.
Okay. Now, if they're so okay, let's say we do that, it's still happening, and like it's sort of a challenge, right? Like they're not at the front of the race. These are challenging races. They're
Mhm.
high performer, but there's a few spots to go before they're the top. They're in that group. So, is there anything else that comes to mind that then might be something to work on as we do that? Like they're coming towards the race, the challenge, and then they're just like the arousal was there, and then it disappears conveniently as we get to the point of challenge.
Yeah, well, okay. One other thing that I think is a big thing, particularly with cyclists, but it comes up in other sorts of racing as well, is that, if you think about typical interval training, it's very structured, right? We pride ourselves on that. But races don't play out that way. Races have a huge element of unpredictability. So, well, you may know that you're going to have to go hard in the next interval in your workout for 4 minutes. You have no idea how hard you're going to have to go to stay on to that group on the bike during the next acceleration. Or if you're the one making the acceleration, you don't really know how long you're going to have to keep going in order to drop the people that you're trying to drop. And I think not enough athletes train for that unpredictability because with unpredictability comes extra anxiety and extra
Right.
stress. And anxiety and stress, as we mentioned earlier, amplify pain signals, amplify discomfort signals. And I actually do a lot of my work is in partnership with people's coaches, try to encourage building in some unpredictable intervals. I call them blinded intervals. When we do a scientific experiment, we try to keep people blind, whether they're getting the treatment or the placebo. We often try to keep the experimenter blind as well. But there are ways to build into running workouts and cycling workouts this kind of unpredictability. So you're not sure how long you're going to have to stay at that threshold pace. It might average, 4 minutes or whatever. I'm kind of just making up numbers here, but maybe it'll only last 2.5 minutes this time, and the next one will last 5 minutes or 5.5 minutes. And so I think building in that unpredictability might be great for this athlete if that's part of the difficulty that they're getting
Interesting.
into.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, no, I do like that. Yeah, and sometimes in a race, I say like you have to keep telling yourself that it's not going to be this hard forever, right? Like it's so hard, you think you're going to drop out, and then it's so easy for like 10 minutes sometimes, especially in
Yeah.
like a more of a road scenario, right? Where you're sitting in and you're like, this is way too easy. And then I try and remind people that when you're thinking that, you need to be also preparing that it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done coming up very quickly. So you need to be like ready for that. But that
Yeah,
could be a piece.
I have a close friend who's a Tour de France veteran, and he shared with me that he couldn't tell me exactly how many times, if he had only held on for another 3 seconds, he would have made the selection.
Yes.
Um,
And that's
we
what I was
got to
saying to this
practice that.
athlete. Yeah.
We got to practice that stuff, and there aren't a lot of opportunities to practice that, but we can build them in to our
Mm.
training. And it's true for runners too, by the way.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's funny how that like you were only 3 seconds off, but then that explodes into, especially in a cycling race, right? It could be
There
you're
it
10
goes.
minutes, right? And it's
Right.
you were so close.
So
But yeah.
close.
And then you don't know, right? Like, and that's where having observers or video is like, yeah, you were like really close, but it's that, like you say, this like brain fractions of a percent of belief, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why would we expect that we would be good at that if we don't practice it in our training?
Hmm. Now, here's another one. I know you do a little bit, I think, around expectation and belief. I think I've heard you say use those words. So, let's use the same sort of like someone who's doing well. We're all doing well. And we have this expectation for the race. So maybe it's something like we're going to finish one of these big bucket list races in a X time and get this belt buckle, and I need to be this fast. Or I'm going to win this race. I'm going to be the national champion. But then we get into the race. So those are our expectations. And then we get into the race, and that is not the reality for whatever reason, technical, mechanical, digestion. Faster people came. And so before the race, we would have said, oh, but we would definitely finish the race, or like I'd be happy with 10th, but my dream goal or my A goal is winning belt buckle this time. But that is not the reality. And then I quit. I don't know if you
Yeah.
see this, but this is something we see, especially with the age groupers, right? Like, because a lot of times the finish is worthwhile, but even with some of our elites, it's like they give up the 10th place finish, which would have been meaningful because they aren't in the first place. How do you head that off or deal with that, especially during the race, right? Or maybe it's before the race that we need to be ready for this.
Yeah, I always think that anything we can do in advance to have very clear intentions about how we're going to handle different situations that come up before they come up is really good and really important. And so a lot of the work I do with my athletes at all levels is really talking about these kind of situations so that they don't just blindside them when they're already on the limit and compromised. We want to have fewer decisions when
Mhm.
we're stretched thin, right? Because we're not at our best for, you're not going to be great at like, any kind of decision making when you're under extreme duress. We need to devote all those resources to performance. So we want to have talked about that. But when this comes up, of course, the worry that I think you probably have and I would have is like, is this, once you do it once, it gets a lot easier to pull the plug the next time, right? And does this become a habit? There are obviously times when you should pull the plug and not finish the race. And there are a lot of contextual variables that are important there. Like in road cycling, there are a lot of times when people pull the plug, right? Because there are good reasons. They're professional athletes, and finishing the race is going to impact their recovery and their ability to
Right.
perform later.
Right.
But for most of us, we don't race that often. I think there's real value, unless there's something seriously wrong, to finishing, no matter what that means in terms of our result sheets and so forth.
Hmm.
Um, Intention is a big thing, right? And getting really clear about your intentions and being very clear on your sense of purpose and why you're doing this in the first place. Is it just to win the championship and get the medal and have the shot of you on the podium? Or what is your deeper why? I guess would be very important in this kind of context, right? And
Hmm.
one would hope that, well, it's great to get that sort of social attention, that the bigger motivating factor is internal and it's something about yourself. And if that's the case, then it's okay to give yourself the grace and freedom to, you know, finish whatever in whatever fashion it takes.
Right. Yeah, I'm almost thinking I have a little bit of this, but I'm wondering if I could be more organized in just even having like the standard scenarios that you might be present like and then going through those ahead of races, right? Where
Ooh,
it's
like a
like,
worksheet.
yeah, I guess like, are you prepared for this scenario? What would you do, right? Like this is a thing that could realistically, like there's only so many iterations of the future where you win this race. Like, are you okay with being fifth? Like, is there a meaningful, like that for a lot of people, that's still a meaningful result, even in pros, right? Like it's good to have finishes that are
Great.
top five, top 10, whatever. Let alone finishes at some of these big races. A lot of our families and sponsors and whatever would be happy just with like you did this bucket list race. That's fantastic. Great.
Yeah, and really getting clear on different, keeping a very clear line between your self perceptions and results, right? So, like, you don't want your self worth tied into accomplishing your athletic goals. I think it's really important. And it's important at every single level of sport to be clear in your head about that. Because when you blur those lines, it never ends well in the long run.
Mhm.
Um, I like to tell the athletes in a more practical side that the people on the podium are not necessarily the people that had the most fantastic legs on the day. They're the people that did the best about solving the problems that came up during the race and moving through those obstacles. And I think there's real truth in that. And practicing and having clear intentions about how you're going to get through some of those obstacles. Like, look, let's say you're a gravel bike racer, right? Gravel racing now. You better know how to plug a leak in your tire, right?
Sure.
And you better know what to do if that doesn't work and how to quickly get a tube into that thing. And you better practice that. Well, you're prepared for that obstacle. What about these other obstacles that might come up, right? What is the game plan so that these are somewhat automated responses that don't require a lot of should I or shouldn't I? Because when we get to the should I or shouldn't I, that's when the opportunity comes to take the number off and call it a day and
Right.
get in the sag
That's the
wagon.
point. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in some of those cases, like, the plugging one is a great example because I know a lot of athletes are like, oh, I've never done it. And I was like, well, this is a solvable problem a few months out from a race. You can
You-
definitely practice this. There are ways
yeah,
to do it.
right.
But if you wait till race day, then it's easy to be like, I don't even know how to do it.
You
Right.
don't want, right. You don't want to be trying to figure that out on the side of the road when you're exhausted. And that, right. All of those things, that's a great example of just how you set yourself up to have the opportunity to drop.
hmm and I think to your examples of these more cognitive things is why we might use self-talk or refocus or, things don't go well. I got a flat and then I continued the workout and I talked
Yeah.
myself back into it and got back and what's the focus and what's the win for today or what can I deal with, right? And it's this training and practicing in advance is really the big piece.
Yeah, I'd like to. One question I think is very telling to ask an athlete is what do you do when you go out to do your interval session? And let's take biking for an example, and you can't hit your power numbers. Do you turn around and go home, or do you accept that and do them at, 20 watts less? And it's really an interesting thing to hear. It's not so much the answer, but it's the reasoning that people give for which of those things they would do. I know that I would prefer to be working with the athlete who says, well, I know there's value in getting through the workout, even if I can't do it at the numbers that I would like to be hitting. And I think
hmm
that's true because that has transferability to what we're talking about, which is resilience.
Right. Right. I love it. I like too that the answer is less like it's almost like there's 0, 1. Like I just go home and get pissed off at myself, and then there's I grit through it. But you almost want the answers in between where it's like, oh, I would, maybe if really tired, I'll just do the time at an endurance pace, or I'll work on skills for. You almost want those like, okay, well, this happened, so then I had a solution and I executed. Like, that's sort of how I view that? Is like as long as it's between the 0 and 1 answers, we have something to work with.
Yeah, for sure. Some very smart person said something to the effect of, don't let perfect become the enemy of good or great. And I think that is a really important kind of central tenet for success in endurance athletics.
I love it. What a great note to finish on. We don't want to keep you longer, but let's make sure that we get the details on how folks can get in contact and even just a brief, like what they might get in contact with you about. I know cerebralperformance.com is your website. Is there any other key information we can pass on to the listeners?
Yeah, so they can visit the website and learn more about who I am and the kind of work that I do. I also welcome people to drop me a note. I try to be good about responding to emails. They can write me at scott@cerebralperformance.com. Um, I'm very limited in my capacity to work one-on-one with athletes. I cap it at 12 because it's the way I like to do it is very personal and very interactive. And we spend a lot of time before races, after races, as well as the biweekly meetings that we tend to set aside. Um, if people are interested in whether I have capacity to take them on, shoot me a note and we can have a conversation about whether I'm the right person to work with or not. Um, I'm developing some plans for the future for some group-based stuff that would make it possible to, build sort of training groups that could work together as well. And so people are welcome to express interest in that. But generally, I'm always welcoming of comments, questions, and that's what makes this fun, right? It's the personal relationships that matter the most. So.
I love it. Yeah, so we'll link to those. I see you have a newsletter as well and an Instagram, so we'll put all those in the show notes if folks want to follow along and keep in touch. And yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure to meet you both. Thank you so much for having me on. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.